I'm not going to waste any time, and right away I'm going to tell you a lot of the champions on this list really surprised me, and in more ways than one, which of course I'll get into when I actually get to going over each of those champions. If you are also surprised with me, like the video and let me know what surprised you in the comments below. And while you're at it, you may as well subscribe so you can catch the rest of our videos as we keep going through the patch and keep releasing guides. And when the only thing that you're interested in is guides, then you should definitely go check out our website where we have tons of guides that are all done by challenger level players. But for right now, I need to get to telling you guys the best champions on this patch, so without further ado, let's jump right into the mid lane. Coming right up to bat immediately is a champion who I definitely thought would be strong, but not quite this strong. Swain has been absolutely dominating on this patch, and it really is because of the buffs that he received recently, along with people realizing just how much strength that gave him. Swain players are finding the most success with a rather aggressive playstyle, taking Conqueror with Presence of Mind, Tenacity, Coup de Grace, Nimbus Cloak, Transcendence, and CDR Adaptive and MR in their minor runes with Flash and Ignite for that early game aggression. And in order to make Swain a really self-sufficient champion who can do just about anything on his own in almost any scenario, they're going for Rod of Ages into Sorc Shoes followed by Zanyas with Liandry's, Rabadons, and Void Staff. There's pretty much nothing that could fight you at that point, and you can always walk into multiple people without really fearing for the consequences. Right now, Swain mid is just that good. Just because he's good does not detract from the other champions, and the next one I'll get into here is Galio, who has been for a while dominating mid lane, as he has the ability to counter pretty much any magic damage dealing champion. With Swain and any of the champions that we listed on our tier list and the higher tiers really being popular right now, Galio is finding success by taking Aftershock with Shield Bash, Bone Plating, Unflinching, Nimbus Cloak, and Transcendence, with Adaptive, and MR in the minor runes, taking Flash and Teleport. While technically you could take Ignite if you really wanted to go aggressive, usually Galio is better with Teleport because of his power in the TP plays that he can make with his amazing CC. In terms of items for this build, the most success is found with Protobelt, Merc Treads, Zanyas into Liandry's, Rabadon's, Void Staff. Pretty similar to what Swain is going, but of course you can go for the defensive boots if you need them. Otherwise, you may as well just go the Sorc Shoes for the magic penetration. Galio does scale really well with magic resist as it does help him in multiple ways throughout his kit, but if you don't end up needing the tenacity and the magic resist, then absolutely, buy something else. And the same thing can be said with your minor runes. You don't need the MR? Then don't take it. You should take armor into matchups that are AD focused. The very last champion that I'll highlight here for the mid lane is Annie. And Annie's been around for a while now, but she really has just been tearing it up, and she isn't showing any signs of slowing down. Before I get into the runes, let me just say that the most popular runes aren't always the best performing ones, because right now Annie's most popular runes are Electrocute, Taste of Blood, Eyeball Collection, Ravenous Hunter, Manifold Band, and Transcendence, with CDR, Adaptive, and MR in the minor runes and Flash and Ignite for summoner spells, but in reality her highest win rate takes Comet instead. The play rate difference is pretty large. You're looking at something like 60 or 70% play rate on Electrocute, while Comet is sitting at something like 10. And if you want to find out more about the differences between the two rune sets and the differences of the itemization that goes along with them, I actually just made a guide recently for the website on this particular topic. But if you're just here for the quick takeaway, then let me give you the items to go along with this Electrocute Annie. You're looking at Ludens, Sorc Shoes, Zanyas, into Rabadons, Morellos, and Void Staff, giving you a ton of magic penetration and a lot of ability power, while sporting really good cooldown reduction as well. Right now, you could describe the mid lane as being pretty plain. There's nothing too crazy, but Swain being an up-and-coming new addition to the top of the roster is very much welcome, as this lane does need some shaking up. With mid lane wrapped up though, let's move on to the top lane, and talk about our star performers there. First up, the Fiora buff really came in big time for her here, as her performance has jumped up a ton across all elos, not even just low elo. And considering that she is a pretty high skill cap champion, that does make a lot of sense. Giving somebody another second and a half to work with in the most tense scenarios can cause a champion to really skyrocket. Fiora players are finding success with Conqueror, Triumph, Alacrity, Last Stand, Magical Footwear, and Biscuits with attack speed, adaptive, and armor in their minor runes, taking Ravenous Hydra as their first item. They do rush a Tiamat, don't just rush the lifesteal unless you absolutely need it. From there, they're sitting on the Boots of Speed and not even upgrading them and going immediately for a Triforce and then completing a pair of Tabby or Merc Treads depending on the enemy team. Afterwards, looking at Death's Dance is really important because it is one of the best items on Fiora, giving her insane synergy with everything else that she's built and everything that she's trying to do. And for the last two item slots, you're looking at things that can either bolster your sustain like a Spirit Visage or just resistances and survivability like a GA. If you do actually just end up needing more damage through either armor shred or maybe healing reduction, you could go for something like a Mortal Reminder or even a Black Cleaver instead of these two. But for the most part, Fiora's true damage should carry her in that regard, and you shouldn't really need it. Fiora isn't the only one to find success after having a buff though. Shen is still absolutely destroying the competition right now, and believe it or not, in a more aggressive way than you might be thinking. That's because Shen players are still taking Grasp with Shield Bash, Second Wind, Revitalize, Cheap Shot, and Ravenous Hunter, but they're also taking Flash and Ignite. Don't forget to round out your minor runes with the attack speed, adaptive, and armor, by the way. Shen is already pretty much considered to be a lane bully. He is a very strong early game champion. He has constant shielding, great damage, the ability to CC people, and mitigate incoming damage with his W really well. The only thing that Shen really lacks is the ability to all-in somebody really reliably, because usually what ends up happening is that you need to have some really clever plays that the opponent doesn't realize ahead of time, because Shen needs at least 2 Qs to be able to all-in somebody from a decent amount of health. Ignite fixes that problem entirely, and allows you to get a lot more solo kills that people just aren't expecting. And in the build here, nothing has truly changed. You're still going for a Titanic early on by rushing the double Ruby Crystal for health and then going a Tiamat. Afterwards getting a Tabby or Merc Treads depending on the enemy team, and follow that up into a Sunfires. Afterwards, Adaptive Helm is a really good item, and at that point the only thing you're lacking is just more health, so you should go something like a Warmogs, and then maybe you have to get a Bramble Vest because you're up against teams that have a lot of lifesteal, at which point you would be finishing out a Thornmail. If you haven't, a really solid late game item for Shen would be a Locket to give your team even more shielding after you show up with your R. The last top laner is somebody who's been around for a while and really been doing well, ever since before Shen and Fiora really started to pop up. Urgot has been a very strong champion and still remains one, and even shows a bit of flexibility here with a slight change in the runes, because Urgot players are taking Press the Attack for a more aggressive early game, followed up with the, let's say, normal Triumph, Tenacity, Last Stand, Second Wind, and Overgrowth, with double adaptive and armor in their minor runes and the Flash Teleport. Having Press the Attack allows you to win certain matchups before you would normally outscale somebody at either higher levels when you have really low cooldown passives, or when you just have enough items to overcome them. And by allowing yourself to have more power earlier on, you still remain stronger than the enemy in the later stages of the game. You just aren't as ridiculous with the Conqueror healing. It's a trade-off that you make in order to have the potential to snowball the game really hard and completely out of control. The items for the Urgot build are pretty standard. You're going for Black Cleaver into Tabby or Merc Treads depending on the enemy team, followed up with a Death Dance. Then you're going GA or Righteous Glory depending on what you need, Engage or Defensive Ability, then a Mortal Reminder, and then a Spirit Visage. With this mix of items, you have really solid Engage or really solid Kite potential, and at the same time your damage is absolutely insane, and you do counter people who like to heal a lot. And at the same time, you actually heal an insane amount as well, thanks to Death Stance and Spirit Visage. And Urgot wraps up the top lane, so the only thing left for us to do now is to move into the jungle between the top and mid lane and talk about the Bush Boys. And the champion that I'm going to lead off with is somebody who I really didn't expect to do that much better after the buff they got on this recent patch. Hecarim has been actually destroying right now. He did get a movement speed buff on his E, but it didn't stand out as something that would really make him a champion vying for the best of the best in the jungle right now. I guess that just goes to show that even across the other lanes as well, with champions receiving similar buffs and similar performances, that the game is actually kinda balanced, I guess. Hecarim players are finding success by taking Conqueror with Triumph, Tenacity, Last Stand, Magical Footwear, and Cosmic Insight, with attack speed, adaptive, and armor in their minor runes, taking Ghost and Smite. Usually you end up taking Ignite Smite or maybe even Flash, but it seems like people are once again all-inning on the movement speed and it's really working out well for them, so it seems like running people down is back on the menu. We do see a really interesting innovation, so to speak, on the jungle item progression here for Hecarim though, because players are starting a talisman and then completely ignoring their jungle item, similar to how you might see a Rengar do it, where they rush immediately for their core item of Triforce into Death Stance. Usually they pick up boots very early on as well, either Merc Treads or Tabby, because Hecarim does scale with movement speed in ways that other champions simply don't. Once you got your 3 core items in, yes, I'm counting boots as a core item because it really is for Hecarim, you can then upgrade yourself into a Cinderhulk, followed by a Spirit Visage and then a Sterix, to really round out your tankiness and make you a very hard to kill pony. The next champion is somebody who I think a lot of people are definitely underestimating, and it's Vi. Vi, ever since she got buffs and the Hail of Blades changes came in, has always been a solid contender, but with the even more recent buffs to her Q, it really has put her in an amazing spot. Vi players are going for Hail of Blades with Sudden Impact, followed by Eyeball Collection, Relentless Hunter, Triumph, and Alacrity, taking attack speed, adaptive, and armor in their minor runes, and Flash and Smite, of course, as a jungler who doesn't have movement speed scaling like Hecarim. These runes have been around on her for a couple patches, but she is still staying very consistent and even rising upwards, I would say, in terms of her performance, as other junglers are nerfed slightly downwards. The same thing rolls for the items, where Vi players are taking Warriors into Tabby or Merc Shreds, followed by Triforce and Death Stance, which is pretty similar to what Hecarim does, just with a little bit of a different progression, and of course Warriors is different than Cinderhulk. After the Death Stance, you're looking at Asterix and then a GA to round out your build, giving you great resistances and survivability overall with really good damage. Vi isn't the most insane or flashy jungler, but she definitely gets the job done a lot more often than most people might think. The last jungler I'm going to highlight here is Nunu, because ever since he got his AP ratios adjusted, off-tank AP Nunu has really been snowballing out of control. And that actually wasn't planned, and that's kind of cringe, not gonna lie. But anyways, you're going for Phase Rush with Nimbus Cloak, Celerity, Water Walking, Cheap Shot, and Relentless Hunter, with attack speed, adaptive, and armor in your minor runes, and Flash and Smite. This rune set turns Nunu into an absolute movement speed menace, giving you literally everything movement speed based that you can get in runes, with Relentless Hunter, Celerity, Water Walking, Nimbus Cloak, and Phase Rush. Because you just are absolutely juiced in the movement speed department, you actually don't end up needing Blue Smite, which is why a lot of the Nunu players right now are going for Red Smite Cinderhulk, and it seems to have a higher win rate than Blue Smite usually had. Since movement speed is important for this build, you do want to go straight into your boots right after the Cinderhulk, but then you follow that up with a Proto Belt, giving you health, cooldown reduction, ability power, and a tiny amount of mobility, which can come in handy, but in reality, what you really want is the damage that gives you. That little crumb of AP is all you need to really become an out-of-control monster. And right afterwards, you're going right into the normal items, with Dead Man's following it up with Spirit Visage afterwards, and then a Thornmail as a last item if you need anti-healing. Although Stoneplate as a more generic last item would probably be a better choice. You just need to make sure that you aren't stoneplating at the wrong time when you're trying to deal as much burst damage as you possibly can. Because if you stoneplate at the wrong time, well, then you're kinda cutting your damage in half, and that's really not a good thing to do. Nunu wraps up the Bush boys though, so now we can move into the bottom lane and start talking about AD carries. And right now, before we get into the actual 3 champions that I want to highlight, right now I just want to ask, what on earth is going on with the statistics page on u.gg? Because I took a quick visit to see how things were panning out across the patch, and for some reason, Lux AD carry has like a 62% win rate, even though she has a support item. I don't know, whatever. It's just, don't always trust the websites, guys. Sometimes they sell you some weird information. Anyways, the first AD carry I'm gonna highlight here should probably come as no surprise. Caitlyn has been destroying ever since she got her small buff on the patch, and these players are taking Fleet Footwork with Presence of Mind, Bloodline, Cut Down, Nimbus Cloak, and Gathering Storm, with attack speed, adaptive, and armor in their minor runes, and taking Flash and Heal. I want to point out the Cut Down here particularly because they're abusing a trick that I went over on last patch's Broken Tricks video. If you take Cut Down on a very low base health AD carry like Caitlyn, and you combine it with a Cull as your starting item, you actually have your Cut Down active in the early game against enemy champions. And it might not seem like a lot, but it actually adds up quite a bit. And the sustain from Cull early on in the game is actually better on any non-headshot auto attack that you're throwing out. Now you know that little caveat for the very first starting item. Afterwards, you're looking for Infinity Edge, Berserker Greaves into Rapid Fire Cannon, followed up with a Storm Razor into a Phantom Dancer, and lastly, a Mortal Reminder. While the build doesn't actually feature any lifesteal, that's the point of the Fleet Footwork and the Legend Bloodline, so you shouldn't feel bad about not having something like a Bloodthirster or a Death Stance in your inventory. With the one obvious AD carry out of the way, it's at this point where a lot of the rest of bot lane is kind of struggling, because when Caitlyn is strong, she tends to choke out almost any other AD carry, because Caitlyn strong means early game domination in almost any lane. The next AD carry I'm going to highlight here is Ashe, because Ashe is somebody who can be able to stand up to Caitlyn in a one-on-one, And even though she can suffer in lane because her range doesn't quite match Caitlyn's, it is one of the best options available to you right now. Ashe players are taking Lethal Tempo with Presence of Mind, Legend Alacrity, Coup de Grace, Magical Footwear, and Approach Velocity, with Attack Speed Adaptive and Armor in their minor runes taking Flash and Heal. And Ashe's strengths really does come in the form of her arrow. And Caitlyn, having not that much mobility, usually ends up getting caught out by it, and that can reverse the effects of Caitlyn's early game domination and pressure over any other AD carry. In this case, it happens to be Ashe with the arrow. In terms of items, these players are going for Blade of the Ruined King, Berserker Greaves, Renon's Hurricane, Death's Dance, Infinity Edge, Phantom Dancer. This really hasn't changed ever since last patch, and it's a very, very strong build with amazing sustain and really good damage. It's not going to shred anybody who has a ton of armor, because obviously you have no armor penetration, and if that actually ends up becoming a problem, then you should be selling your boots for armor penetration, as the Blade of the Ruined King movement speed alongside the Approach Velocity movement speed usually ends up carrying you in the later stages of the game. The last AD carry I'm going to mention here is Kog'Maw, because he really is the only other champion who has enough range to contest Caitlyn in the early stages of the game. He can stand toe-to-toe with her whenever he has his W on, and by that ability alone, it turns out that he really isn't suffering too badly under Caitlyn's newfound reign. Kog'Maw players are taking Lethal Tempo with Triumph, Alacrity, Coup de Grace, Taste of Blood, and Ravenous Hunter, with Attack Speed Adaptive and Armor in their minor runes, and Flash and Heal. The synergies for Kog'Maw's laning patterns with Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter are really, really good, because he heals off of all the damage that his W is dealing, and with his long range abilities and long range auto attacking with W, he'll get at least some health back anytime he goes for something. And even when Kog'Maw is in short range mode, it's not so bad, because the first item that you're going for is the Blade of the Ruined King, followed up with Berserker Greaves, then Rage Blade, Renon's Hurricane, Wit's End, and Frozen Mallet. This turns you into a really, really hard to kill Kog'Maw who can DPS just about anything down, and especially later on, your damage can trump almost anybody. The only thing you're really lacking is armor, so if that ends up becoming a problem that's very apparent to you, you should definitely trade out your Wit's End for a Death Stance, and maybe even consider replacing the Frozen Mallet with something else. The amount of health and the slow that it gives you really is unmatched, but occasionally a Randuin's might be the right choice. Since Kog'Maw has no mobility, sometimes you just gotta sit there and take it. With Kog'Maw rounding out the 380 carries, let's talk about support now. And I'll lead off with the champion who definitely surprised me in what I saw being the most successful. Even though I knew that Sona was going to be a strong champion on this patch, I didn't expect her to have this setup being so strong. Players are taking Guardian with Shield Bash, Conditioning, Revitalize, Magical Footwear, and Cosmic Insight, with Adaptive, and Armor in their minor runes, taking Flash and Barrier. And that's not the end of the, let's say, weirdness, because the items really are very interesting. Players are going for Spell Thieves early on and then rushing a tier, followed up immediately with Sorc Shoes into Lichbane, into upgrading their tier to an Archangel Staff or maybe even a Seraph's at that point. This is basically like a full AP Sona build in the very early game, but with extremely defensive runes, which is a very interesting blend of the two sort of playstyles you would think a Sona would have. Sometimes you could go full AP and nuke somebody with like Electrocute by taking Lichbane early on, and other times you could take stuff like Aerie and maybe Guardian and just focus on shielding and building supportive items. And this time it's kind of a blend of the both, because after you get your Seraphs, you're looking at Redemption, Shurelya's, and Locket to round out your build, giving your team movement speed, healing, and even more shielding should they need it. The last thing I'll point out about this build is something that's actually pretty hilarious, because Shield Bash's synergy with these items in particular and the summoner spell of Barrier is kind of funny, because you could stack your damage if you thought you could one-shot somebody by using your Seraphs ahead of time and then using like a Lichbane Q Spellblade proc with your passive, of course, to really just chunk somebody out. It seems kind of wasteful to do that, and you probably shouldn't, but I'm just saying it's something you could do. And I mean, hey, if you're getting dove onto, then that might be exactly what you want to do to try and immediately kill your attacker, or at least do something against them. With Sona's uniqueness out of the way, let's go to something that's a bit more, let's say, standard and kind of boring, as Maokai has been around and been really solid for a long time now, and this patch is no different. Maokai support is taking Aftershock with Font of Life, Bone Plating, Overgrowth, Presence of Mind, and Tenacity, with CDR and double armor in the minor runes with Flash and Ignite for summoner spells. It's pretty aggressive in the early game, and your scaling is also pretty solid, as you have great healing from your passive, and the tank items that you can buy are really solid right now. Players are going for a Relic Shield early in the game, followed up by Tabby or Merc Treads. They're not really focusing on super catching people out with like a Moby Boots or a Swifties, and instead focusing on the team fight and team-oriented damage by going for a Zeke's and then a Knight's Vow immediately afterwards, spiking up their survivability and their teammates' damage. Then a Locket and a Spirit Visage to finish out the build can allow you to help your team out even more in ways that Maokai normally wouldn't be able to, while also making him tankier than most other supports. The last support I'm going to highlight is somebody who's also been around for a while, but is the true extreme in terms of survivability and tankiness. And of course, I'm talking about Taric. His ultimate and the runes that he takes and the items that he builds, and his ability for rapid-fire machine gun healing is just almost unmatched. Players are going Guardian, Font of Life, Bone Plating, Revitalize, Presence of Mind, Tenacity, and CDR and Double Armor in their minor runes with Flash and Ignite. By having all of this, you have your Guardian shield, you have your W shield, you have your Q healing, you have your R for invincibility, and with your items added on top, you've got a Relic Shield in the early game with Tabby or Merc Treads, followed by Zeke's Knight's Vow Redemption Stoneplate. Zeke's giving your allies damage anytime you look to extend a fight with your R, Knight's Vow for better survivability for you and somebody else, Redemption for healing for even more because, you know, at this point, you really just need it. And lastly, to absolutely demolish any hopes the enemy team had of killing you before your ultimate finally went down, a Stoneplate to make sure that nobody actually can accomplish that ridiculous feat. This is probably the tankiest that we've ever seen Taric, as in the past, players used to like taking Ardent or maybe even other supportive items like Mikael's, which made them squishier but had better utility. Now it seems pretty clear as to exactly what's performing the best and exactly what they're looking for in their itemization. And with that, that's all the best champions for patch 10.16, and hopefully you got surprised by one of the champions that were on this list, or maybe the builds that they were taking. If you want to try any of these champions out, I really suggest you take a look around our channel for the guides that we might have on them, and if we don't have them here, then we probably have them on our website, GameLeap.com, where we have tons of guides that are all made by Challenger level players, on just about any topic as well, not just champion guides. You can be looking for something generic in the lane or something all the way down specific to a champion. Doesn't matter what it is, we've got something up there for you. And of course, as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.